Hello and welcome to New Zealand. Richard Miller, Never Not Here. The saga continues. Hey, happy Easter. It's even Sunday. And resurrection is happening in 3 days, so don't be late. And, I guess we're all trying to resurrect or rebuild ourselves, or we're looking around and saying, well, what can we do with this life? And are we people that are offering ourselves to others around us? Are we actually contributors? Or, is this the life I want to live? We have these second thoughts. Maybe we have doubts. Maybe we certainly have feelings too. And maybe they're troubling and maybe they're joyful. And then we have judgments to say if they are troubling or they are joyful. And so life goes on. There's a barrage of information coming at us from news and from internet and from publications and from other people and from gossip. Somehow we sort through it all and move forward and live a meaningful life, we think. So then I'm in the business of asking, what is this meaningful life, and what is this contribution I'm making? And it seems to be satisfying to find that, hey, I can even do more, or meet new people, or feel people in a better way, not ignore people, include those that are around me. And these are all questions that we're continually asking on Never Not Here. So we're asking the experts. So please help me welcome Bernie Pryor.
Hello, Richard.
Hey, Bernie.
Hi there. Yeah, welcome to Easter.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, every day of the week.
Easter's every day, right?
Yeah.
I used to think New Year's was every day, right? Because we could be reborn or have a new resolution or a new outlook. Or
it's beautiful to ponder at what Easter is about for us. The death, the period in between death and rebirth, as it were. And I think it's a great subject to look at and see what we discover, because you mentioned lots of things there. One of them that really touched me was meaningful. You used the word meaningful quite often there. Meaningful life. You used it a few times. Can't remember exactly, but
yeah. Well, meaningful. Maybe just it might just be personal. What's meaningful to me, because I'm the one that's judging myself in the end. And many other people are judging me too, even now, but I'm rejecting those, or kind of like washing those over myself. I'm not really touched by them so much usually, but if I am touched by them, then they're the meaning that I really believe.
So can I suggest to you that we look at the core of all this before we go into the personal and the nature of the personal in this, and nature of the self in this. Let's look at the core of this. Yeah, can we start from there?
No, I love the core. I mean, I love to just go before anything. Before any construction, and then what was here? What's here before anything?
Yeah.
Is that where the core is?
Well, what's here, in my knowledge, before anything, is meaning. That's what's here. It's not someone doing meaning or someone being meaningful. What's here is meaning. I don't know.
See, I always thought that meaning was an overlay.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
and so
right.
then this is brand new for me.
Yeah, that's right. Most people think the word meaningful is to discover meaning. But if someone discovered meaning, you discover the real you. The real you is meaning. That's who you are. And do you see how deep that is? I mean, when I just mentioned the word meaning, everything opens up. I mean, depth. opens up. In my experience, I don't know whether that's your experience in this moment, it's like we could dive down into meaning and there could be no end of depth. And to be that meaning, the core of one's being, or more precisely, where being comes from, being or beingness comes from meaning. So what we must be, if this is right, we must be meaning, we must be that meaning before we're even being, before we're even becoming, which then we can bring kind of Easter in, as it were, or what the symbology of Easter can mean in our lives, you know, because as if Easter was something that happened 2,000 odd years ago, and that Easter wasn't it wasn't an event. It's a fine, ongoing principle at work: birth, death, and rebirth is an ongoing principle at work in the cosmos, and all this comes from meaning. So
yeah, I can understand what you mean when you say it's an ongoing principle, death and rebirth.
Yeah, it's not something that happened 2,000 odd years ago.
It's not even the body, it's just,
it is. It includes,
certainly is death of concepts, you know.
It is, and let's say the body can be a concept, can it not? You know, but let's just get back to the root. Well, let's
keep talking about meaning, because I don't think I really got the connection exactly, or what you mean by meaning, I guess. We're getting.
Okay, you see, I can only point towards this. One has to discover this. But if we consider that you and I are awakened or awakening beings, and awakening to that has no beginning and end, as who we truly are, yeah. And if the people that are listening to this are also in the, let's say, the ongoing process of awakening, and maybe we discover what that means as we further this conversation, then awakening then is, we could define awakening to know in each and every moment, in the mirror of activity, in the mirror of self and other, in the mirror of object and subject, in the mirror of things, that in an instant, when we're truly awakening in a profounder place, or to a profounder place, in an instant, we can know as consciousness. So I'm not speaking as a someone, I'm speaking as consciousness. As consciousness, we can know whether we're being meaning, whether we're being what we're connecting with, what we commune with. So for me, for us to even have this conversation, we're in communion, or at least I am knowing communion in the deep, and communion with you in the deep. There's a communion that's happening. To me, that's all that ever does happen, is communion. To make that aware and alive, to me, is meaningful. So in any moment, anyone that's truly awakening to more profounder consciousness, to more subtle awareness, begins to know whether they're being truly meaningful in each and any moment. Do you follow what I mean? It's not a measurement, it's just a knowledge that begins to arise. I could have been more meaningful with that, which is the same as saying I could have been more what I first am.
When you say communion, sometimes we misconstrue that maybe and think that that's something that goes between two poles, right?
Right.
But in another way, communion is just the action on the screen of awareness. You know, it's like the action on, like somehow by being alive and being here, I'm a field where things unfold, and that could be the communion. Well, maybe that would depend on your stage of
development. You can be a field that unfolds if that's where you are, but it's not where I am. I'm not a field unfolding. What I am is meaning, and being meaning, then what is unfolding is the expression of what I am being as meaning. So what I'm being as meaning is simply unfolding in life, right here, in awareness. But that's what I am. I am awareness. I'm not a body, I'm not a mind, I'm not a thing, I'm not an entity. I am awareness. And to me, pure awareness is meaning. It's meaning itself. And everyone that I speak to, I know is meaning. Real meaning awareness. But whether one is meaningfully aware of their real meaning, do you see the paradoxes? You know, this can go to the mind, this can just get all jumbled because we just don't know ourselves in this way when we're not shown how to truly acknowledge ourselves as awareness that has ever expanding, growing, integrating consciousness as light, integrating consciousness as energy, integrating consciousness as form. This constant integration of awareness as consciousness, constantly knowing itself. That to me is meaningful.
Well, let me just pause a little. I mean, integrating consciousness as light, integrating consciousness as form. That just means like the unfolding of this moment, or I mean. Well,
it does.
The moment changes, you know, is always changing, right? So that could be called unfolding. The form is always changing.
The forms of what awareness, consciousness is are ever changing. That is true. But the absolute consciousness doesn't change. That's the self, or the authentic self. It doesn't change. But within that actual, within the real self, there are multidimensional possibilities that are taking place, that one has the ongoing evolutionary possibility of bringing greater meaning to form, greater meaning to consciousness, greater meaning to life.
What are we saying when we're saying multidimensional possibilities?
Well, what I'm speaking of is that for us to even have this conversation, we're actually functioning already on many different levels.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a way to look at it, but it's all one, right? I mean, who divides it? Just mind divides it, right?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. No, mind doesn't divide it. Mind divides it when you're not knowing who you are. When you're not knowing who you are, then there is division or duality. When you're knowing who you are, which is basically not knowing who you are, that's the paradox, right? Never not here.
I can resonate with that.
Yeah. Well, when you.
But I just didn't know where the levels come from.
Well, the levels are very natural. That as awareness, with growing consciousness, appearing here as you and I and the people listening to this, we have the capacity to awaken consciously on many other spheres of life and consciousness that we don't identify with as yet, because God, if you like, or Source, is so endless and so deep. We have the possibility of awakening on higher levels of reality, and therefore awakening on higher levels of reality, we have the possibility of bringing those higher levels right here in our own communion, our own conversation, our own creativity. That would change the face of how we live.
But this is just a happening, right? I mean, like, does it really, okay, let's say that you're experiencing a certain amount of levels and I'm experiencing fewer right now. And if you speak about those levels, is that going to allow me to experience more, or is that going to somehow, or will it just happen naturally to me?
You see, this again is one of the paradox, and I've had lots of conversations like this where it can just go round in circles because there is this belief system that there's nothing to do here, and it's a belief system there's nothing to do, but who you are is doing. Who you really are is doing. Who you really are is doing the cosmos, is doing the expression, is expressing already on multidimensional levels, but those multidimensional levels are already what it is as one whole beingness. But nonetheless, it awakens to each level through you and I. You and I can awaken as meaning on any level of being whilst we're in human form. To me, this is just amazing, because to me, this would be the end of suffering on this planet. That if we could commune, connect, and communicate with finer, more subtle levels of our being, indeed the very ground of our being, then we can be that in everything that we become. We could literally co-create new forms of expression that will know no end. They would be transmitters of finer levels of reality. That's the whole point of this.
Is this something that's easier to manifest in relationship, like with you and me here, or is this something that I could do by myself, or would happen just so-called alone?
Okay. I feel we've entered the times when we're beginning to awaken to what we are deeply as one. So you hear this thing about oneness. To me, that's some image in the mind that we say, well, we are one or we are oneness. That's not actually true. There is only one, but it's being, the beingness of that one. By you being that's meaningful. By you literally being what that is, that brings that oneness here. So there's not oneness here. There's no oneness here. There's one here, but there's not oneness here until this one, or more than one, is starting to be what that one is here. Then there's oneness. There's only oneness here when more than two are being that one. Which is great. I mean, look at that, brought a smile to your face. I mean, there's something about that. There's something, yeah, I know this on some level. I'm knowing this, and it brings a smile to my face, and it brings joy to my heart that this is possible. And it's a possibility that will know no end. To be more of what one is, ever more in oneness with others, is co-creating the universe. We're downloading, as it were, more of what we are on ever higher, deeper levels. And that to me is the death and rebirth, which Easter signifies. It wasn't about one particular man. It's about, if you want to put it this way, it's about the consciousness, which could be called Christ. There's many other names for the same thing. About the consciousness that is knowing itself through a formed self, a you and a me, that has fulfilled one level of experience. So it has a self of experience. And what comes out of that self of experience can be a profounder level of consciousness. So therefore it no longer needs that experience anymore. So death is then when consciousness realizes it doesn't need to identify with anything in a story, in a self, or in a person, or in a culture anymore. It's the death of that and the realignment of sourcing each moment from its deeper reality. And that actually creates a new self-structure that's capable of a new self-structure. This man, woman, humanity, the human form, includes everything, including its culture, is able to download a higher frequency into a new self-structure that's happening naturally through the resonance of you and I having a conversation, not from past, linear past, or from a self experience or a personal experience, but from what we're now knowing on a finer level. giving birth to a finer level that has nothing to do with history or any previous story. It's a whole new book.
Right, a whole new, well, it's like a potential or a creativity or a creative field. But let's see now.
It will create the field.
Yeah.
But what I just pointed to, as you just brought the word field in once again, to discover you're not the field, to me, is of the utmost, I'm going to use the word very lightly, importance, because we get mixed up with fields. Fields are expressions, and it's not actually about the field. It's about the real alignment with what you are prior to the field. That's what creates a genuine field.
I'm not so sure what a field is or what I mean by field, but I think I mean something like a ground where manifestation can occur, where something can appear.
Well, you could identify a field as a field of self. To me, that having these bodies is a field. To me, this body is a field. It's a field of energy that manifests, as we can see, on many different levels, even within our own biology. But it's all manifesting this field in an open space. And to me, the open space is what we truly are. And also what we truly are is the appearance of the field of expression within that open space. They're both the union of what we are. The open space and the immediacy of new form is what we are. That. They're not two, they're one. When we're not knowing ourselves more clearly, we identify with the field prior to identifying with the source from which the field comes. Therefore, we get stuck in the field until the field starts to break and rocks, because it can't hold our ever deepening and higher potential, our ever deepening higher possibilities. It can't hold it. It has to expand. It has to grow. It has to break open in some way, because we always exceed our current experiences. You can have a look in history and you'll see we've exceeded our current experiences. And when we exceed our current experiences, our intelligence has to be, as it were, aligned with not the old experience, but the new, as it were, the new download that's coming in. If it's not, then let's just call it, we'll bring another word in. I don't know whether you'll like this word or not, but if not, the ego will have a knowing of newness, but it will manipulate it for the old sense of self. And that never works, because what happens is that we begin to hold a power as a separate sense of self. When you're really deepening or climbing into the higher places, then the separation of you being a separate entity, a separate consciousness from the entire universe begins to dissolve or fracture. There's many things that happen. It's the death of our old way of being, which actually invites us into a new way of being. And so we enter a higher reality.
When we're talking about an old way of being and invited into a new way of being, you mentioned that, like, we could find ourselves stuck thinking that we're the field,
that's right. We're the field being a body mind.
Right, and I was wanting to ask, like, what's the nature of this stuckness? You know, is that a belief system? It's a habit and a belief,
habit
or it's
like a belief.
It's a way. It's an angle or a point of view.
It's a point of view of the body-mind system and the consciousness that's stuck in the reflections of body-mind. In other words, of linear time. That what any of us can do, you'll see this is so obvious, that we can all constantly relate to each other through how we saw each other yesterday, 10 years ago, we can constantly relate to that.
To everything, actually, to relate to everything that we see.
As us, we begin to identify with forms.
With respect to what it was yesterday.
That's right, and so therefore what we build a denser field.
So that's a habit?
Well, it is a habit because then we all consolidate that field through always addressing each other as history. So always addressing each other through past experience, never meeting each other in a deeper heartfelt communion of being that pre-exists everything that we everything that we
Well,
taste.
we all know that this thing does change and does move forward, right? But sometimes slower than we think it should, right? And I'm really curious about the mechanism of, like, when we get tired of a belief and when we move on, and it's almost like we're not doing it's happening, but we're not consciously. We could even say we want to quit smoking or something, and it doesn't happen, right? So we can be fed up with something. And still it doesn't move forward until it does. And somehow I wonder what that mechanism is. Somehow we just get tired of that old belief or that old paradigm.
Well, it can work that way. And obviously for most people, it does work that way. And that can be, let's say, millions of years.
Takes a while, right?
Of the old, excuse me, it must be this American connection, but the old bummer. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. But it has the bummer, because it's like this repetition of patterning in ourselves and with each other, and it's like we can't get rid of it because we're not supposed to get rid of it. We're supposed to. We can do.
Well, we don't see what's the source, right?
Well,
we don't see the source.
We can.
While we don't see
the source is the source is us.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't see the mechanism of the source, and so then we want to get rid of this looping, this pattern, and then it doesn't seem to get rid of.
That's simply because what we do to get rid of it, and I'm not advocating getting rid of it. I'm saying what I'm saying is become deeply aware of yourself as awareness, because it contains what that is. It's not separate from what you are. What you are contains what that is. It doesn't actually contain you. You just believe it contains you, like a habit that keeps coming up that you want to get rid of it. It seems to be more powerful than you. Yeah. But that's simply because all your attention is on that habit as a problem. Yeah. Because on some level, we won't let ourselves fully feel what that is, deeply feel it and deeply know it. And that's essentially our dilemma, is that we won't allow the old pattern that seems to be bugging our life all the way through, because we don't want to feel it, because it disturbs us too much, or it might cost us a relationship, or whatever it is. A fragment of ourselves. To allow it through, whilst disidentifying with it, you could say is essential, through aligning with our essential nature. So, for instance, any habit that's happening, that's a habit within yourself. Who you are is beyond yourself. You're not that self-structure. You're actually the one that designs that self-structure. So if you can, and you can, practice a communion by being truly, I'm going to use the word devotionally honest to what you're truly knowing is true and seeing is true, at any cost of movement in yourself or your person, then what will happen is you'll be identifying with a finer place of your being, but this habit will be burning somewhere. Inside or outside, nonetheless, this habit will be burning. But we're so used to not letting habits burn in ourselves because it's too uncomfortable, and socially it's not acceptable. To let that burn. Do you see what I mean?
So for me, burning just means, like, okay, feel it like you said, but then when you feel it, you're just not interested anymore. Well, it's just old stuff. Like it just moves away by itself, right?
Certainly, it doesn't move away by itself, because everything that is moving is actually in you. So you're the one that's doing the moving. On a finer level, allowing something to burn is allowing whatever that energy is to return home to you. And as it returns home to you as conscious awareness, much will happen on the level of self and personal relationships. But most of us, most human beings, value our personal relationships outside of ourselves and ourself more than we value what we're knowing to be true. And so therefore we divorce our personal relationships to ourselves and to each other. We divorce them from what we know is true. Therefore, the truth of our being cannot heal or bring up the separation and change it in any way, because we want to keep ourselves completely separate from what we know is true. And why we do that is if we go with what's true and allow those old patterns in self and person to burn, on the outside level, it might mean someone leaves us. On the outside level, it might mean we have to face a few things that we've created in self and person. Do you see what I mean? And we don't want to do that. But the whole point of rebirth, if you could see in the symbolism of this weekend, you know, the crucifixion, yeah, the period in between where much was happening but nothing seemed to have been happening. It's actually a process of resurrection, and then the rebirth of an entirely new, finer body, an entirely new, finer vehicle of perceptive, alive self can arise. A new human being, a new being can arise. In that very process, then, one is going through a process of allowing those old habitual patterns to burn inside of your very presence. It can be really uncomfortable.
Clarify a couple of things, you know, because a few things you said. Okay, one is like what we know is true, so we know something is true, and then you
in the
said,
deepest place I'm speaking of.
Okay, and then there's some kind of like, okay, then there's some kind of a separation, that we keep ourselves separate. So that's in the deepest place too, because many of us are not aware of that. We're identified with that separation, and so we don't see it as an activity. We see it as what is.
Yeah.
And then you're saying that we don't want to miss it to a relationship, or we don't want to lose something, or so on. And so all these things are coming from a deepest place, or does that posit the subconscious or something like that, or are these?
Okay, so let's look at this a slightly different way. Let's see if I can bring this a different way. Humanity at the moment constructs its life from past and from habit, constructs life from what is already appearing in our slipstream, you know. So
in our memory stream, right?
Well, in our memory, but nonetheless, that has form. So the moment that you look at someone, particularly, you don't even have to know them, but there's a relationship that's happening immediately from where you're sourcing, where you see them from. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
So you could see someone, a complete stranger, from a place that's not true, from a place of self and person, right?
Well, it's always not true, right? I mean, at least in this society that we know, I mean, we're always...
But this is the whole point.
It's a virtual life, right?
But this is the whole point.
A whole bunch of thoughts.
The whole point of what we're looking at is that we can constantly recreate the same old dilemma and the same old pattern, the same old limitation. As awareness, we can still do that. We can keep, which is what we're doing. We can keep on repeating and looking at each other and never seeing each other at the point of communion, right in the depths of our heart, and never really seeing our true face of consciousness, just repetition. And if you look around the world, there are cultural repetitions that have been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And then someone can just awaken out of that for no reason at all. Suddenly, somebody gets up in the morning, as it were, and they're not the same as they were yesterday, and they don't see others the same as they did just in, and they don't see their life the same.
Well, what happened? I mean, some of that slipstream just collapsed or something like that? Or, I mean, what is the nature of that collapse?
The nature of that collapse is that the entire cosmos is, as it were, under pressure of the glowing real you. The glowing real you is the constant background of everything that exists. And the glowing real you is not creating the pressure. The glowing real you is permeating truly everything that you ever can touch, taste, or see. The glowing real you is here already. But it doesn't mean the glowing real you is what you've embodied as yet. Because because your self structure, your person, and the culture that we constantly relate to.
The slipstream, then, can we call it that?
The slipstream is suddenly the glowing real you penetrates who you once thought you were. Suddenly, like a flash out of the blue, suddenly you just see completely and utterly the whole pattern of reality. Suddenly you get it. Suddenly the glowing real you replaces the ego you, replaces the limited you, and suddenly you see everything as it really, really is.
Is it so sudden? I mean, is it always sudden, or often sudden, or just
when I say
is it
sudden,
helpful to be sudden? Or
when I say sudden, one can awaken to the glowing real you. One can have a taste, one taste of the glowing real you, that can alter your whole perception of life to a certain degree. It can transform quite some large patterns within your psyche.
Can it also just sneak up on you, like little by little every day, and you don't even know the difference, and then finally you realize everything is glowing?
Well, the thing is that the very continuum that's taking place in the universe, that they're like the sun's actually shining 24/7. Just because it gets dark, after 12 or 8 hours, it doesn't mean the sun stopped glowing. It's still glowing, and that's very much the symbolism of reality. The reality, the real reality, the moment of the Big Bang, the moment everything was suddenly expressed from the depths of what Source or God is, that's still very much here. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's still very much here. In fact, it's so much here that it's constantly developing its consciousness to know itself, to come home to itself. It's constantly developing forms so that it can be more of the infinite real nature in form. And so there's this constant glowing that is penetrating who you think you are, is happening. The thing is, though, each and every one of us has the capacity to override that if we so want to. That's why there's a word called surrender. Surrender is you would have heard the word surrender. When someone has an awakening moment, a one taste of who we really are, then this word surrender comes in, because you can have a degree of awakening, and who knows what level that might be at. But let's say it's at a level that really shows you reality as it really is. So suddenly, everything that you once believed was true about you and about the cosmos suddenly isn't anymore. Suddenly you're seeing on such a fine level that all the forms that you use, because we're all using forms, you see, it looks like we're not using forms, but constantly we're using forms to relate to and to know ourselves. Well, what if the formless penetrated all your forms, or enough of your forms, to make all your forms redundant, and suddenly they didn't mean anything to you anymore? Do you get that one? I mean, I think maybe you're in that process. and suddenly it's like, what is all this about? Because suddenly all your forms, or most of them, become redundant. They just seem
less important, right? They seem less important. And then you were saying we could...
only for the time being.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, only for the... See, this is the paradox. Only for the time being, because you can have such an awakening, and then you can... then you might, as it were, move or endeavor to move as what penetrated you, what awakened you. So it's still a game. It's still a game, because now you still have this concept. You've got a certain degree of awakenness, and some of your forms have changed, and sufficient enough for you to see a finer reality that is possible, but you're still trying to function that reality as your current forms. You haven't yet surrendered all of your forms to that awakened you. You've not traded places yet.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? And that's the process.
Well, is that okay?
Of course
because
it's okay.
Is there a hurry or a rush or what? What's going on here,
Of course it's okay, but it's to be really true with this, that there is this constant process, because this
but
side
a natural process, right? It's just a natural process.
It's natural.
Or is it a natural process to pull back from it? The natural
both.
process. Both, huh?
This is the strange thing, because as one ascends, if we can call it that way, there is also part of you that descends. You know, so there's this pull up, and there's this also this pull down. Do you follow what I mean?
In other words, a pull up seems to be optional. Like you can say, well, let me test it, and let me go down. Let me test it, and let me go down.
Well, you can put it that way. This way
seems to be optional, because we can go both ways.
Is that for what you've realized on the finer level to come into form, there has to be an agency of that. There has to be a you. There has to be this guy called Richard, this guy called Bernie, or this woman called, I don't know, whoever she is. There has to be an agency that has awakened to the pull up, but still, as it were, is an agency of that pull up, which is beyond the body, within the body. You have to awaken to you're the agency, or the real I of that beyond in this ever-present moment. You're that agency.
So say a little bit more about agency, because I think that's a new one for us, you know.
Okay.
And that's what I thought I meant by saying I was a field, you know, like I'm the agent for this thing to appear in.
To me, the field is a field of energetic expression that for human beings, most people don't see that everything is a flux of energy that's manifesting on a lower vibration to make everything appear to be solid. So a field then is an expression that's coming from who you identify yourself as. So, for instance, you might call yourself Richard. Well, you're an agency or an agent to keep Richard happening, right? So at first you're an agent to keep Richard happening, and that might be for quite some time that all your forms are related to keeping Richard happening. You got it? You know, all his ego structures, this is no problem, it's just how it works. First you're integrating everything to keep Richard identified as some blob, some human form. And we're all doing that and bumping into each other. Do you see what I mean? That's just one stage of integrating enough alive consciousness for you to integrate the more of what you are, not as Richard, but as pure being, who now is moving as a pure being in a form called Richard. Do you see what I mean?
Well, so, just pure being, or like you just could say as mystery, right? Like
you
we
can
don't
use
even
the
know.
word mystery.
Richard is something we know, and no Richard is something we don't know.
Well, yeah, that's the whole point, isn't it? The whole point is, can Richard be completely that you don't know? That's the whole point. Yeah. That's exciting to me. That's exciting.
Pretty exciting.
Yeah. Can we all be something that we don't know? Wow. So now you can see the paradigm shift that actually takes place, because when we really don't know, then there's a higher reality that we are, and I've initially called it meaning. Now we're meaning that's becoming. Meaning that has no beginning and end is now becoming. Do you see how it went silent? And yet wasn't it within that silence an energetic movement of wowness?
Becoming just means it's showing up, right?
It's
in manifestation somehow.
It's more than showing up. It's being created as meaning. This person that called itself Richard at some point is now discovering its being, and that its being is the meaning of life. You know, literally the meaning of life. You are the meaning of life. You pre-exist all life and really all consciousness. You are meaning that's beyond it all and yet in it all, and you're awakening to that. So suddenly everything begins to change. Suddenly, as conscious awareness, you have, as it were, access to ever higher dimensions of reality, and access to ever inexplicable depths of pure meaning. You have access all to that. As you can see, we can't speak about that too much. You know, you can't describe that. There'd be, if you described it, it would be a concept.
Yeah.
But you can feel it, and you can know it, and you can know the excitation of knowing that. It ignites something in us. You could say it ignites our soul. You could say it makes known the possibilities.
Yeah. Well,
that
in
can arrive
the
here
world
in
of
this life.
Richard, in the world like where we see things, where things show up. I mean, is there evidence, somehow evidence of when this occurs? I mean, this meaning and this let go and this mystery and this connection, this agency where this can all occur. I mean, what's the evidence, or what does it look like on the manifest side? You know, from the reflection side, maybe.
Well, this is a strange thing, because you can't really identify what it would look like. All that you could say is that you clearly see there is a real communion and a connection between others that is so beautiful, that is so nourishing, that is so deep, that we respond to that connection. And in that response, contained within that response, is an entirely new creation. We begin to create together from a place of inner response. And that changes every life on the planet.
You'd think that you'd be able to see that, you know,
of course you can see it.
The nourishment, you know.
Of course you'll see it. You'll see it in the joy of being. You'll see it in the joy of relationship. You'll see it in the joy of creating. You'll see it like that. That's how you will see it. But you will know it in an inexplicable way. You'll know that you can connect with an other and go to places that are not actually manifested yet. Making the connection between the formless into form. That you become the agency through choice of a incredibly deep place. You become its agency by sourcing each moment from that place and responding to that place, to everyone that you meet and to all life's challenges. You respond from that place, not as a separate self, not as a separate person, not as a particular culture or color or creed or gender. You respond to life only as that connection of your deepest interior.
I guess I'm just defining that to be a natural destination, that somehow by opening your heart or just staying open, or somehow there's a magnetism that just takes you there, and that actually you can trust that.
But there's also lots of I'm going to call them bus stops. I don't know.
A lot of side trips.
A lot of side trips that you can have as consciousness really begins to awaken to higher potential.
So maybe you have to take a few of those side trips.
Well, you might, until you stop. You see, that wouldn't be
until
pure,
you lose interest in them.
Well, yeah, but how much would you have to do that? Do you see what I'm saying?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You don't know, or you do know, and that's really a stage of honesty. A stage of honesty is when you realize there's no experience that ever is going to fulfill you. The seeking of more experience, no matter what it is, no matter how cosmic it is never going to fulfill you, right? That all experience belongs to the self, that actually you transcend. So it belongs to a self that operates through a person. So when you finally give up having side branches, side tracks,
so these side things are all temptations, right? And then you have to say, well,
more needing experience for yourself, for that self. There's nothing wrong in it.
Needing? Why do you say needing?
Well, otherwise you wouldn't go off. If you didn't need them, you wouldn't go off.
Well, you'd be tempted, or you just, it's a belief in neediness, right?
Neediness, wanting are all, let's say, cul-de-sacs. Because when you've gone off of one of those cul-de-sacs and you've gone into them, and you've really gone into them, you've got to completely go into them. Otherwise, you can be in a cul-de-sac for how many lives? Who knows? But you go into a cul-de-sac and you think you needed that experience because you wanted it for yourself, basically. You still think that's God in a cul-de-sac, all right? On some level, of course, it is.
So some of these cul-de-sacs like addictions?
Let's stay on this track.
Okay.
The cul-de-sacs are your belief that you need experience to be what you first are, but you actually don't. All that one can do is respond to what you deeply know is true. That's not a cul-de-sac. Then you'll be on the real path or the straight path, and it's a narrow path. It's a fine line path. Right. You'll be on that path.
But it's easy to recognize because you say that the truth that we already know, right?
But it's easy to recognize. But whether you will respond to that recognition in all of your life, right, constantly, because it will mean that those cul-de-sacs of separate experience, you might go off, because to stay on this path may cost you more than you're willing to give.
Well, what does it cost? It costs all your falsity, right?
Yeah, but be honest with this, Richard. There's got to be some real honesty in this. For instance, in partnerships, it may be that on this, take a breath. It may be, you can play this game of this is cool, but when it's right on you, that's when you're going to know what it's really costing. Of course, on the highest level, it costs nothing because in the deepest, there is only that.
It's probably cost your so-called security, and even when you say relationships, then you say, well, we own this house together and this stuff, and then we'll be squabbling over it.
There's much more than just the owning of houses or objects. All the forms, they're simply encodements of something that's happening within you. So when you look at someone, and when you look at something you identify with, like this house, when you look at objects, they're really encodements of something that's happening in you. Do you see what I mean? They're encodements.
That's a very good way to put it.
That is, yes, because eventually those codes have to be broken or dissolved, because who you are is not a code.
But every one of those codes is a neediness, right? Because you're saying, hey, this is useful. I should have this. Right? This in a way.
This is the paradox. The paradox is that that one comes into an entire field of patterning. Okay, an entire field, a universal field of patterning or encodements.
Well, is that collective consciousness? Universal?
It's universal consciousness.
You come into it like you're born into it?
Yes, everything is. Even the stars and the planets, they're all patterns or encodements. But they're finer ones. They're doors to that needs no code. But the thing is, you have to go through these codes to get into that has no code. Do you see what I mean? So the funny thing is, yes, because the beautiful thing is, and the funny thing is, you'll need the code to get into that place.
To get into the no code.
To get into the no code, you'll need that code. You'll need.
Now that's a paradox.
That is, of course.
This is beyond the paradox of words. I mean, we're talking about something beyond words that says somehow we need words in order to get out of words, right?
Do you know what the code is?
What the code is?
Yes, the code.
That's the truth that I already know, right?
Okay. We could put it this way, seeing as we're speaking of Easter, and only because for most people, Easter has something to do with a man or an enlightened being called Jesus, right? That's what most people reflect off of Easter. We were starting off showing that actually Easter depicts a natural movement of life as birth, death, and rebirth, and it's a continuum. It's the constant restructuring of self to manifest higher, ever deepening realities of being. And that's how we all grow.
So it goes, in a way, it's from code to codeless, right?
It is, until there is no code that you identify with. Then you become the maker of code, or the maker of co-creation. You actually begin to be the creator. But first off, you've got to go through all those codes. And those codes aren't always comfortable to yourself. So what's happening then is the code is truth, and the code is love. But you can't be love unless you're being truth. And so this man said, the one we've just mentioned, said, be true to thine own self. And that's the whole point. To be true to your own self, I would say, to be true to thine own self is the same as saying being true to the depth of your being. Not yourself as a person, not yourself as a culture, not yourself as a gender, but be true to...
Yeah. Okay. So then all those codes, the culture, the gender,
they
all those
have
to get decoded or get dropped, right? And
dropped.
To be true to yourself, we think that might be a code too, but we're saying that maybe that is not a code, right? True to yourself.
No, it's not a code. But
no code needed.
It's not a code, and yet there is a code. Because to be that true, you're going to have to change the code of yourself.
Change it or just drop it?
No, change it. To be the agency of that no code, you have to be that here. You have to choose being true. It doesn't just happen. Be honest here. Being true doesn't just happen. Until it does, of course. Until it does. Until you are that truth. Until you're integrated as that truth. But even then, when you're integrating as that truth, integration is the one constant in the manifest universe. Evolution is constant. It doesn't matter how deeply realized you are. This part of you, the formed part of you, is constantly evolving. It's evolving because if forms are constantly changing, to have knowledge of the form and its codeless state, then you've got to move with it, and therefore you have to have a self that evolves to be able to match that transcends the code, but also includes it.
Does form have a codeless state, or is form actually a code? In that
the only code in form is love. That the truth that all form is one form, really. It appears to be many different forms, but what form is the total expression of the formless immediately. She's the total expression of the formless in this immediacy, not when you add time or look at things through the window of history.
Not through the slipstream.
Not through the slipstream.
Yeah.
No. The moment that you're immediately present and here, only in that moment are you embracing the totality and everything that happens within that totality.
So sometimes maybe we don't really recognize that totality, but we can recognize the slipstream. I mean, I'm driving along over the mountains and I'm saying to myself, right now I'm living a virtual life, you know, because I'm in the slipstream. I realize it. And I just say that to myself.
Yes.
And I recognize that. And then nothing I can do in the slipstream will undo the slipstream, right? No.
What one master once said, you can't get there from here, right? No, you can't. So you can't try to do anything from an identification with body-mind to bring in what you really deeply are. You can't. You can only constantly respond to through full surrender to what you're really deeply knowing is true. Surrender is also part of the code, or the decoding. The total surrendering to what you deeply know is true changes the code and changes the form.
Yeah.
And realigns.
In a way, it's tricky because, like, what you deeply know is not code, right? And
That's
so
right.
then we think we're surrendering to finer code, but it's not true. We're surrendering the code, maybe.
This is where your self structures begin to get dissolved, And the showing up of self-structures that are dissolving are in your interrelationship with your own self and with others. So what's dissolving begins to show up in how you respond to other people, how you respond to life. You know, suddenly a bout of anger, say, or a bout of jealousy, or any kind of movement is a demonstration, actually, that there's a dissolution that's actually going on. It's just a question of whether you will be the agency of that dissolution. In other words, allowing an old pattern to completely break open and dissolve in your conscious awareness without you trying to...
So it has to break, you have to have such a bout, in other words, so you can finally just experience it fully?
Everyone does.
If
you have a look, even some of the greatest poets that's ever been on this planet have spoken about the breaking of this caste, the breaking of this pot. Rumi spoke constantly about this self being a pot, and that it has to crack open, wide open. We have to crack open. Sometimes we dissolve open, and sometimes we crack open, and sometimes we break open, sometimes we burst open, and sometimes we sweetly open. Who knows how it's going to happen?
Yeah, like sweetly open or dissolve is what I'm always asking about, because why does it have to be a big explosion?
Well, that's true, but often we learn much from the big breaking open.
Yeah. Okay, but I mean, like, there's only a big breaking open because there's some expectation, and the sweetly open doesn't seem to fit that expectation.
Who knows how that it really is? To me, within anything or beyond anything, that whether it's dissolving or whether it's breaking, behind it always sweetness. And that when we really surrender, some of our very strong patterns begin to come up, right? And to be true to what you deeply are can be very uncomfortable, but also at the same moment, within all that uncomfortableness, in deep surrender, there's a sweetness that calls you to give it all up, to surrender it all, and as it were, take what's coming. In other words, allow it through. Let it unfold. It's all God after all. Let it unfold. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I can feel it. Yeah, it feels very attractive.
Yeah, because it is attractive. It's like the current that runs through everything is the one and only attraction we're drawn to. That current of ever moving life. God in movement, you could say. Source in movement.
I don't know, something I've done maybe to help myself access, at least be in this direction, is like I've tried to diffuse certain temptations and realize that they are cul-de-sacs. Like, for instance, I would say I don't have any temptation to have a drug experience, or to take some ayahuasca or go into some kind of thing like that. And I think people get in that for years and years and years and think they've seen something and that it's going to be an important scene. But to me, it seems to be farther away from what's happening right now. And I don't see why I have to construct that.
That's right.
And so then I can really recognize the direction of coming closer to what's here now and just giving up everything else, or somehow moving off on another exploration.
Again, this is a strange paradox, because someone may have to go through the drug experience. Someone may have to take they're drawn to ayahuasca because they have to go there to discover the more through that drug. I mean, I'm not saying this because I've never taken a single drug in my entire life, but I've become aware of someone who's around me at the moment that gives me descriptions of their trips regularly, I've realized that some people do need to do this. Whether they'll begin to make an identity of doing it is another thing. Whether they'll be able to drop the need to have a drug to open the profound to them, my knowledge is that will have to take place.
Well, then in that sense, it is a cul-de-sac.
It's a cul-de-sac if
they're going to have to back out of it, right?
That's right. It's a cul-de-sac because to me, no matter how God opens up in anyone's life, no matter how it was, whether it was through drugs, sex, I don't know, whatever it was, if God has opened up in you, now you're knowing the truth. So now, knowing that truth and living what that is your only real vehicle home. So you'd have to surrender all those other things. So
you have to surrender how you got there too,
That's right.
Whatever your spiritual practice was, or whatever
the habit,
your experience
the habit of needing something.
Of needing experiences, right?
Yeah. But then the response to what you're knowing, to be more immediate in your life, to be the immediacy of what you're really knowing, is to truly open up and merge into the depth of what the heart is and beyond, and emerge as its expression. So you literally change. To me, this is what Easter is. You literally change through the death of habit, through the death of past experience, the story. Each and every moment can be both birth, death, and rebirth. Birth, death, and rebirth. We become pure beings in that way. We become so in communion with what is deeply, really here, and never not anywhere else, and literally being that in our life. So then we begin to be as that creates the universe. No longer separate from it, but I know that we can awaken as that inside a human form. We can respond to that and give form to that inside a human form.
I can kind of see what you mean by the death of a habit. I mean, it just seems like a habit's in place because of some kind of interest or some kind of belief that it's needed. But when you say the death of past experience, I don't see how that can die. I mean, unless you have a lobotomy or something like that. How does the death of a past experience happen?
Because as one deepens into your real source nature, then you begin to see clearly that you're actually free of past experience. You can still look at experience, because to me there is a value in what brought you to God or what brought you deeper, so that you can relate to another that are having similar difficulties, similar experiences. You can relate as consciousness within your human experience. You can relate from the past, and how a past experience contained for you the truth. That it wasn't the experience that brought you to the truth, but the experience of whatever it took place opened up a profounder place within you, and suddenly you were free of the experience, because contained within that experience was that actually transcended the experience.
Do you just recognize the experience was a construct, and it really
Definitely.
wasn't real?
The entire universe is a construct, but it's a true construct. It's an ever-evolving, moving, living, great being. That's what it is. But it's ever-moving, ever-changing shape, ever-expanding.
And so it operates through these agencies. Is that what we were saying?
Well, from the highest perspective, that's all there is. From the highest perspective, there is only this one agent, this one whole being, right? But then it's awakening to itself through the multi-dimensions of its expression. You, me, and stars and planets. It's just an amazing thing that's happening here. God is happening. God is not happening. The absolute is active. It's not doing anything. If you fall into the deep, it might seem to you that it's not doing anything. That's because you've taken yourself in there. You can't see that actually in the deep there is much, as it were, so subtle going on. But here, that is being expressed. The absolute is active. It's not doing anything. It's doing everything. And it's not separate from any dimension of doing this.
So we need a subtler eye and a subtler ear somehow,
That's right.
or we have to take our attention off of all these gross movements and
That's right.
somehow just look at what never stops.
That's right. To open to everything as it is no longer to be separate from the one that's doing it, no matter how it looks. So then you're merging back into that one, and you're, as it were, being that one in everything that you express. It's a response, and it's a direct experience. It's a direct experience that not only are you more still and more quieted inside, but also you're more passionate about life, more passionate about possibilities. You're more passionate about others. You're certainly more compassionate in helping others to define their own God potential.
Yeah. That sounds so true to me. It just sounds so, it has to be that way in my mind, or maybe if that's what I know to be true. And then in a way, that's what Never Not hears about, because so many times it seems that spiritual teachings will take you to some still point, but they'll do it by dismissing engagement and dismissing passion. No. And it doesn't seem right. It feels passionate. Like I smell a rat. You know?
Yeah. God is definitely, in my life, passion itself. You see, I can describe this just one other simple way, and I'll use a form of my hand to do this. Where we are at the moment, we have this this field that looks like this, and everyone's functioning from this field over thousands of years that's been knitted together, right? And it's all fields of relationship to body-mind identity, where with no communion or connection, to the most part maybe, to what transcends this current field. And every time anyone, no matter who they are or what stage of experience or evolution they're at, responds in any moment to what they're really knowing is true, doesn't matter how that looks, when they're really knowing that that's true, they're already creating a finer field or a finer self, and it's descending. And we feel the pressure of more and more people, more and more beings being true to their own self than ever before. And as it descends, this one's quaking, this one's rocking in you, and maybe definitely in Christchurch, but it's rocking, okay? But there's a new field that's descending and coming in. And this field doesn't belong to this field, right? It's completely its own. And yet this field knows the way of this field and has compassion for this field. And as it merges into it, it will include this field, but it'll be a higher field. It will bring this to a higher place. And that's what we're feeling. We're feeling a new merging and emergence of something that we can't quite explain. And yet when we really allow it, we become excited by the possibilities that begin to exist within us and without us, and it's really like that that rebirth moment, you know, the in between moment where you have to roll away the stone of your contraction, you know, roll away the stone of your fear, roll away the stone of your holding on, roll it away and let your heart be open, let it be gaping.
So wide. That's the choice you can make, is rolling that stone. That's right. That's where choice comes in.
The removal of that stone means you're willing to experience everything and anything, no matter how uncomfortable it feels or how it changes life for seemingly you. And so that's what this is doing, and it's coming in, and to be the agency of this.
Is there any danger that when as those fields merge or get together, that actually the lower one will bring the upper one down? Or
no, there's no danger of that at all, because this is of a higher order. This is more sourced consciousness. It's not to say this is not source. It's just that this experience is played out. It's played out. And as this one comes down, it's of a finer beingness. And that finer beingness, as it were, is very attractive to this lower place. But as it descends, this lower place tries to use this higher beingness for its lowerness, and it doesn't work, and that's our pain. You see what I mean? And yet, when we're the agency of the merging of this new place into this old place, when we become the agency of that, we invite our life, we invite other lives to really allow this to take place. If we really become the agency of this transformation, then there is the possibility that the old self doesn't need to rock and reel and spew out. That consciousness, the more we are meaningfully the agency of this higher order, this deeper knowing, when we become the agency of that, then we've become purer consciousness. And for me, everything that even moves on this planet, from nature to every expression of human form, is totally dependent on what one is as conscious awareness. So there's nothing that doesn't reflect what you're now being. Or the entire turmoil that may or may not, in your eyes, be taking place on this planet is a mirror of what's happening in self, yourself, everyone's self. And when we begin to align with this, our transcendent nature and its new field that's being in the making right now through being true to who we are, and therefore being the agency of this new place that's coming in. When we're being that, then nature will start to respond to this higher place. So we can actually have, as it were, less of a turmoil of changeover when we're truly being the agency of this finer place in our own lives and inviting others in our communion to come to this place. There can be a smoother, as it were, changeover.
Are we impatient or are we fearful if we're asking about, is there a critical mass, or how does it work? Or, what is the changeover? Just the description that the changeover could be smoother rather than rougher already empowers us to go for it even more. I think that's very positive, even if whether there's a truth to it or not. It's a story that really helps and aids.
It really depends on where you're sourcing your action from. If you're sourcing your action from fear, if you're sourcing your action of making that critical mass, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That critical mass from yourself, then all that will do will create more distortion. If you're sourcing that critical mass from an innermost knowing and an innermost knowledge, and you're staying with that, then you're literally inviting a deeper communion and connection. That you're knowing on some level that your life, whether you meet others or not, on an unseen level, your life is already inviting that critical mass to form.
Yeah.
So you don't have to meet them.
Yeah, I can see from that second place that even the question dissolves, because it doesn't really matter if there's a critical mass or if we all go down in destruction. You're just moving forward anyhow, right?
I know that one, but I just wipe that one aside. To me, I know that one, and I hear that one. You can see the look on my face, right?
Yeah.
I know that one. I've heard that so often, but to me, that's not real. Of course, it's real on one level. It's real that we are not this, we're not this body mind, so hey, if it passes away, so what? But yes, so what? Of course, to me this is a true formation of a structure of God, right? And so we can literally transform self to match the higher vibration of what God really is. And therefore we don't have to have destruction. We don't have to have separation, even if it is on lower levels of mental and emotional. We can embody a heartfelt invitation to ourselves and to others. We don't have to have destruction. We don't have to have suffering. We can integrate that higher level here. It does matter whether someone suffers. It does matter whether someone hurts. It really does matter. On a soul level, it does matter.
It's so wonderful. It's so wonderful to hear you say it matters, you know,
Yes.
because so many people are saying, "Well, I guess it doesn't matter," and I jump to it and say, "It sure does matter to me. If you'll allow me that."
It's foolish that, because certainly within the realizations within this conscious stream, God loves creation and every being in it. Everyone to God does matter. Do you see what I mean? Everyone does matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the way I see it.
Bernie, we're going to be together a couple of weeks. I'm so looking forward to it. We're going to do a couple of broadcasts. We're going to see what we can create.
It would be beautiful to share with you again, Richard.
Thank you very much, Bernie.
We'll just take this deeper. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for watching this, and really stay with us. We're going to be broadcasting, and even if this is a month later, you can pick up those broadcasts and you can see other things that we're going to do. We're trying to create from a lot of different angles. So our thanks to Bernie Pryor, and we're really growing to love New Zealand, and I know you will too. So,
Thank you.